Hey everybody, Kit Merker here from Plainsight, and I'm joined again by our good friend Marshall Bush. He just got back from Google Next, and I thought I would ask him how it went and hear about the event. So Marshall, welcome. How was your visit to Vegas? How was Google Next?
It was great. It's frankly too short. As Google's cloud platform becomes more and more robust, the 3 days they allocate to this isn't really enough to showcase everything they're doing. I thought it was a really good event. I thought that they did a great job of framing how AI can make them a more relevant player in the hyperscale world. And I thought a lot of what they said was pretty believable.
Were there any I know you went to the keynote. Were there any kind of key takeaways from the keynote, so to speak? What was or any surprises, I guess, from the opening comments?
I guess the biggest surprise is that they were very on message for a company that sometimes is a little scattered. And the messages were, AI first, and they showed relevance in AI on every level from, the frontier models to putting together some agent-to-agent protocols that may be closer to vaporware, but are at least a good effort to solve problems that are real for enterprises. And there was a lot of openness. People who are longtime Google Cloud watchers liked how open the company seemed in its messaging. The small examples, like they showed an agent sending an email and it was out of Outlook, not out of a Gmail client. I think that plays in well to the coming acquisition of Wiz, where they are going to be a more open and multi-cloud company from a security perspective, and security is definitely part of the Google wheelhouse. And also they did a good job of sort of surfacing more first-party Google technology to the world and reminding people that they're best in class from a hardware perspective as well. And that was Google Cloud WAN, where they're going to open up 2 miles of fiber to the world. They claim 40% cost savings and 40% faster speeds. Citadel Securities is an alpha client there, and that makes sense because Citadel's focused on being the fastest in all these execution markets. I thought that was a strong branding win. I thought they showed a lot of relevance, and they also showed off some of their custom silicon in the form of TPUs that appear to have real traction and work at scale and deliver perhaps the lowest cost inference in the world right now.
Well, speaking of Wiz, there's the other Wiz, which is the Wizard of Oz. So I know that there was a big project to show the Wizard of Oz at the Sphere. Well, tell me about that. What did you see there?
Absolutely. Google has worked with Sphere to remake the Wizard of Oz to be, I think, a 16K movie showing in the Sphere. And that was a very complex task that leveraged Google's VO2 video model, and it would effectively upscale the original Wiz to be in 16K versus whatever it was shot in. And then second would add, what AI would add around the traditional movie frame to fit the immersive environment of the Sphere. So it would add, up, down, left, right images consistent with the existing video. And the team from Sphere was very complimentary and said that Google was the only person capable of doing that. And based on what they showed on stage, it was believable. It was a really high quality output in a sort of non-traditional form. And I think it comes out in August, and I'm excited to actually see it. I do go to Vegas quite a bit, so I'll get a shot at that, I think.
You know how I would upscale the Wizard of Oz? I just put on Dark Side of the Moon on the second roar. That's the move. Yeah,
that is the move.
So on another topic, I guess, that we were chatting about before, and I think is an interesting one, is around the data that feeds into AI. And I've been using this term data supply chain. I don't think it's quite caught on yet, but I think it's kind of a parallel to the software supply chain, where people are thinking about where their software bits are coming from. I think the same thing is starting to emerge in data. What did you hear from Google and Google Next about where data is playing into the AI story? What are you seeing there?
The most interesting thing I saw was, and I like your phrase, data supply chain. What I'll say is that for public market investors, when ChatGPT came out in November 22, I think everybody thought this is going to change the world, and the first step will be getting your data house in order. And I was certainly guilty as an investor at the time, as an analyst, still at looking at that, thinking getting your data house in order will be, that will be highly that will be a revenue driver for companies like Confluent, for Snowflake, for whatever you view the next gen data stack as. Enterprises will go to all those companies and buy a lot of software to get their data house in order. And when that didn't happen, I think we all thought that perhaps AI was further away from happening than it was. One of the theses I've been playing with for the last few months has been that data prep, getting one's data house in order, was more of a human intensive effort around labeling and metadata than a commercial effort around buying new data connectors and data stores. And I think that the clearest evidence that is true, I got through a series of presentations, one hosted by PricewaterhouseCoopers and another on the broader event at Next, and they very specifically had HCA walk through their data practices, and it was a lot more data governance, data labeling, best practices, hiring the right people, cultural things to get one's data ready, that suggested that perhaps the actual spending on connectors and stores will be either concurrent or trailing AI really hitting scale as people have more things to offload and to store because of AI, and that the pre-AI spend will be human intensive. And interestingly, HCA also started using Gemini from Google to do some data labeling and data prep that they said, I'll forget the exact time compression, but they did in an hour what a person would have done in 90 days. And on top of that, they said, the person would have wanted to quit after about day 2, from, the highly repetitive labeling, which is, another sort of interesting theme that's emerging is if 14 similar alerts show up in security, a person will look at them and say, oh, this is the same flaw, and investigate one and then group them all the same way, where an agent, without complaining or getting bored, will individually investigate all 14 nearly identical claims and realize that they are in fact identical, or that perhaps one is more of a threat than the others, and deal with it separately. So on some highly monotonous task like data labeling, the concept that you can do it with AI and not only do it faster, but maintain employee morale is I think a pretty interesting concept.
Yeah, the growth in the annotation and data labeling industry over the last 2 years, it kind of aligns with what you're saying. As an aside, I listened to a podcast from The Economist that was on this. It was the Week in Intelligence, where they did a whole study on annotation, and they, it's something like a $5 billion industry just for the annotation labeling. And one of the takeaways there is that the tasks have moved kind of upstream. There used to be a lot of very low wage annotation tasks, and now they're moving into more specialized tasks. And now I think this next wave will be augmented by AI tools, right? We've kind of gotten past this initial kickstarting, and now it's going to be sort of human in the loop more than human-led creation of this truth data. That's such a huge prerequisite for AI training. It's really interesting to see that corroborated from that point of view. And it's an interesting point too about the infrastructure spend related to the data. It's not about necessarily a larger, volume of just raw data, but actually now making the data more curated and more usable for the AI training is really the trend that emerged from this AI. I think that's what you're saying, right?
100%. And it's exciting, to the extent that this data labeling has been one of the long tent poles in this endeavor. The closer we get to being able to do it with AI is exciting, because it also, it pulls in a lot of AI spend, or at least it unlocks the ability to spend on AI.
So I guess that leads then logically to another topic, which is about real world enterprise adoption of AI for production use cases, right? I think, the media use case that you mentioned before about The Wizard of Oz is super cool and interesting and great for generative AI. And I think it's a great showcase of the technology, but there's also, enterprises, and I'm sure you talked with a number of them at Next and got some impressions about how real the end user adoption is. What are you seeing there? Is that ticking up, or are we still kind of in a wait and see mode?
We're seeing a lot of green shoots. I think there's some clear use cases that are evolving. Healthcare is a leader, which is a surprise because they're not usually a technical leader. Telco is coming around. There are a lot of call center and specifically, chatbot text-driven call center applications that look like they're really working. In broader use cases, industrial use cases, preventative maintenance is consistently mentioned, and you're seeing companies like Honeywell, I think Toyota had a presentation at Next where they were talking about some preventative maintenance things they did that were generating a real ROI. And then to touch on something that I heard at GTC that I think is very interesting and worth mentioning is that Prem Natarajan, the head of AI for Capital One, has argued that most corporate users are thinking of ROI on AI the wrong way. And he says they're far too focused on the investment side and how much they're spending, and inadequately focused on the return side. And his point is that over the last 22 months, inference costs have gone down 1,000x. And if we're seeing that sort of order of magnitude decrease in the cost side of AI, as long as the return is positive, and that can be positive in incremental revenue, positive in cost savings, it can be positive in softer metrics like reduced churn or even higher NPS scores that you believe eventually lead to revenue, that the cost of that will continue to plummet. And as long as the R is positive, the ROI will become wildly positive over time. And I think that's a very interesting mental framework to have as people tinker and test with AI. To the extent they can find positive benefits, the cost of those benefits might, collapse in front of them pretty rapidly. And so as long as the iteration you're doing leads to positive outcomes and hopefully increasingly positive outcomes, the cost of those outcomes will collapse.
This is something, with the ROI question, return on investment, because in Vision we talk about regions of interest, but ROI as in return on investment, driving down the cost is something that I have heard about a lot, but I think it's also does tie in with the use case question, because if you are an enterprise and you have these kind of imagined use cases that, maybe they don't pencil out today, there might be some that as the cost does decline and these tools get simpler to use and the data is more available and models are getting smarter, et cetera. But, and importantly, that the infrastructure cost goes down. Like, it should open up, in theory at least, it should open up new use cases that previously were infeasible, that, maybe you can't replace the labor cost of doing it by hand. But to your point earlier, some of this might also be about quality. It's quality of life for the people doing the work, their attention. We humans do get bored with repetitive tasks and AI doesn't. So is that kind of how you're thinking about this? Is that if people now see the trend, they will be more inclined to make bets on positive return for different use cases that previously were maybe like imagined use cases that didn't really make sense before? Is this kind of the thinking?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, as you describe it that way, the analogy that pops to my mind is sort of rolling back to 2011. The initial big data, where if you were storing corporate data in a super expensive EMC system on enterprise drives or on flash, you barely kept anything other than what was required or incredibly important. But once people found cheaper ways to store things, you suddenly could keep all sorts of unstructured data that you could believe that as the cost is low enough, a signal can be mined from this at a positive ROI. And I think that, the cost collapses we're seeing in inference are actually much more aggressive and much faster than anything we saw in storage, at least, in our lifetimes.
That's amazing. So was there anything fun? Did you do anything fun at Next? What did you see that was more entertainment?
Well, the Killers were there. I actually was tired enough by the end that I skipped the concert, but the Killers put on quite a show, I understand. You know, to the extent that, you know, playing in front of 30,000, you know, engineers is a good crowd. It was a good crowd. And, you know, I think it was just a great show in general. I think there was a lot of enthusiasm. I think there are a lot of people excited about what's happening with AI. And I think that, I feel like this is all sort of slowly starting to happen in front of us. You know, one in security, somebody said, it's important that you're thinking about AI. In a security meeting, someone says it's important that you're thinking about AI, because if you're not thinking about AI right now, in 3 years, it'll completely run you over. And I thought that that was sort of the fairest time frame that I've seen people lay out for AI, that it's happening now, it's happening slowly, and in 3 years, it's going to be sufficiently ubiquitous that if you're not there, your head's going to be spinning.
You also got on the trend, I think, of creating a little plastic figure for yourself. I saw your image you posted.
I did do that. I have the prompt. I've created my own action figure. I haven't sold any yet. Apparently, you know, niche research analytics is not a popular thing for kids, but you know, we can hope.
Maybe I'll have to do one for myself. So where are you off to? What's next on the agenda for Baleen Research? Where are you going next?
I am headed to San Francisco for RSA at the end of the month. And I think I'm going to skip down to LlamaCon, Meta's first open event for its LLMs, while I'm there. And I think after that is ServiceNow Knowledge.
That's cool. And for people out there who don't know about your research firm, I guess I should have introduced you in the beginning, but you run a very niche software research firm for very select clients. If people wanted to get access to your report or meet with you at these events, what do they do? Where should they go?
If you go to my website and submit your email address on the contact form, and that's www.baleenresearch, BALEEN research.com. I'm there. I always have time to talk to people. I love to talk to people in the technology field. You know, that's my job, talking to strangers. So if you're listening, reach out.
That's awesome. Well, Marshall, I appreciate you talking to me today. And even though I didn't get to go to Google Next this year, I feel like I went a little bit from your report. So thank you very much, and great to see you.
Thank you. Great to see you. And that's the goal, for you to get 60 to 70% of going to the show just by reading the event.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. And from Plainsight, this is Kit Merker signing out.